I'm a cop in Nevada, for a tiny town of less than 1,000. Courtney, Nevada doesn't actually have a police force. The mayor is usually whoever's soberest at election time, and it's made up of retirees and people trying not to be noticed. It lies between Austin and Eureka, and the whole town is managed by a single officer. Me. I live in Eureka, but 3 months out of the year, I stay in the dingy little Palmer Inn and operate the emergency phone system. It routes to my cell phone, and when I'm not out on a call, I can be found in my room, watching TV. The Palmer actually gets really good satellite TV. You probably think it sounds like a post from hell, but the crime rate in Courtney is next to nothing. I've been doing this on and off for about 3 years, and I think I've only had to reach for my gun twice in that time. We do 3 months on, and then swap with another officer for 3 months, but sometimes I'll just do 6 months in a row. Courtney is as peaceful as a town full of oldsters and whatever else can be. After tonight, however, I'm not sure I can look at the place the same way again. I'm trying to write up paperwork now, but I'm just not sure what to say. There's no way they'll believe the truth, but I swear it's what happened. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. I'm hoping that if I write it out here, then it might be easier to explain to my supervisor. I was sitting out on the town line with my radar gun at about 10:30 at night, when the quiet town suddenly got less quiet. So the only thing really to do in Courtney to justify me being there is to catch speeders on Highway 50. The speed zone changes from 65 to 35 in the course of a mile, and the number of drivers that seem to think they can just blow through the little town doing 60 is way too damn high. I had a rig of my own invention that held the speed gun up to the window, and as good a hiding place as I could behind an old billboard, leaving me basically unseen and my hands free to watch whatever on my phone. I had foregone the adventures of Luffy and the crew in favor of a new horror podcast, and I was getting comfy when something hit the ground hard enough to rock my cruiser in its frame. My phone fell into the floorboard about a second before the speed gun came down to hit me on the head, and I came out of my car rubbing my scalp and cussing like a sailor. I got out and looked across the street, seeing heat shimmers as something cooled in the desert nearby. The oldsters who lived here had told me that meteors were sometimes seen falling out into the desert, but this one had damn near taken my cover out. I had never seen a meteor up close, not unless you count the ones at the museum that my school had drugged the class to when I was a kid, and I was interested in getting a good look. It would be kinda cool to see something that had been cruising through space until a few minutes ago, and I made my way across the road and towards the crater. I was still in the road when, to my surprise, I heard the sound of metal grating against itself. I could see the top of something dark as it rose from the lip of the crater, and the top was still glowing from its entry through the atmosphere. The hole wasn't terribly deep, but this would have still been taller than me by a foot. Would have been a shame if one of those aforementioned speeders had come blowing through while not paying attention, because I would have been roadkill. I was about 60 feet from it, but it looked like one of those NASA spacesuits, except made out of silver. When it moved, it was the herky-jerky kind of steps of a sci-fi robot. You know, the ones you might see in a 50s movie. It slipped in the sand a little, but managed to find its footing as it made its slow way out of the crater. If it noticed me, it gave no sign, and when it came to the top of the hole, it turned and started making its way for town. I hadn't noticed before it got on solid ground, probably because the sand was running down to quench it, but when it stepped, its footsteps left little fires behind. It made it easier to follow, and as I went back to the cruiser to get my radio, I realized I had no one to call right about the time I keyed up the mic. I was here by myself. I was the law in Courtney, and it was up to me to do something about this. I dropped the handset and climbed in instead, keying the engine as I pulled out and followed the strange creature that had crashed randomly on the outskirts of the little burg. It wasn't hard to follow him. His feet left little fires behind him, and his pace was slow, as if he weren't really in a hurry, as he made his way closer and closer to town. Watching him go, I wasn't really sure what to do with him if I tried to stop him. Could he be stopped with anything in my car? I had a shotgun, my sidearm, and a couple of those flashbangs we used on large groups of people. None of that seemed like it would do much against this metal man who was slowly making his way through the desert. Watching him move was like watching a stop-motion short. He was kind of a strange automaton, a metal man whose skin was still slightly red from his fall from space. Instead of pulsing and burning, as his steps had, he seemed to shimmer like a heat reflection. He didn't seem lost, his pilgrimage definitely going in a certain direction, and as the lights of the quick fill broke the darkness with their phosphorescent intrusion, I began to get a little nervous. The quick fill was a 24/7 gas station that boasted 12 gas pumps and a huge underground holding tank. God only knew what would happen if this thing set fires that went down to the reserve tank. I whipped into the parking lot as I popped the trunk and grabbed my shotgun. It had buckshot in it, a higher caliber than the 9mm slug in my Glock, and when I hefted it, it felt like I had 4 shells ready and waiting. There was a box of 12 in the trunk, and I put them in my jacket pocket before chambering around and taking the safety off. I didn't know what this thing was capable of, but I knew I couldn't let it menace my town. "You, all right, Sheriff?" Came a shaky voice from the door of the quick fill, and it startled me enough to almost make me drop my shotgun. Clyde Haggerty, the 19-year-old kid who ran the register at the quick fill after 10:30 p.m., looked pretty scared. He had probably watched me come screeching in, pop the trunk, and go digging for my shotgun, wondering what the hell was going on. In his mind, it was probably robbers or dopers, but he had no clue what was coming out of the desert for him. I didn't want him to see this thing suddenly vaporize me with a death ray or something, and when I turned towards him, he jumped back a little as the barrel of my shotgun flagged him. "Go get yourself somewhere safe, Clyde. Something's heading your way, and I don't want you to get mixed up with it." Clyde nodded, and I heard the door click as he went back inside. Hopefully, he was hiding in the cooler or something. I turned back to find the creature lumbering closer, its distance now about 50 feet from me. The shotgun wouldn't do much at that range, but that would give me enough time to follow protocol and give it a warning before opening fire. "Stop! I'm an officer of the Eureka Police Department, and I'm ordering you to halt and state your intent." The creature didn't even pause, just kept its course as it made for the gas station. "Stop! This is your final order to stop, or I will open fire." It was well within range now, the fires burning behind it, making it hard to miss, and when I squeezed the trigger, the gun bucked as the shot slammed into it. The metal man never slowed in his pursuit, and as I loaded another round, it was now about 20 feet from me. "Stop!" I yelled, squeezing the trigger and pumping a new shell into the barrel as the old one thundered forth. A third shot let fly a second later, but if the creature was even registering them, it never showed it. It kept coming as I fed new shells into the gun, and as I slid the fourth into the receiver, I felt a sudden and excruciating heat. It was like standing too close to a bonfire, and as I stumbled away from the thing, I looked up to find that it was within 10 feet of me. It appeared that it was still very hot, and its skin radiated an intense heat that the sand had done nothing to quench. I yelped again as my fingers blistered, and I realized the gun was soaking up as much heat as I was. I tossed it down, and not a moment too soon either. The bullets in the weapon began to erupt, sending the shotgun flying apart. As I turned away and covered my face just in time, I caught some shrapnel in the arm and a little in the back, but I was spared the worst of it. As it lumbered past, I tossed the shells out too, lobbing them as far as I could manage before they went off as well. Even so, I was reminded of a time as a kid when I'd reached for something underneath the radiator while it was still on. Even though I'd been careful not to touch it with my face or hands, I could still feel that heat coming off of it, as I stretched for a toy that I had lost under there. It was like that now, except this thing was a walking radiator. It went right past me and towards the gas station, its course unerring. As it came around the side, I remembered another weapon at my disposal and ran back to the trunk of the cruiser. I had a fire extinguisher in there, one of the big ones that I'd needed to put out a trash fire once, and as the creature came around to the front of the store, I pulled the pin and sprayed it with a stream of foam. It coated the thing, hissing as it hit its superheated skin and sliding off like the cheese on those copper pans they're always showing on TV. It was impossible to tell if it was doing anything, but as I played it out, I heard a hellish sound coming from the front of the store. The thing had reached out and melted the glass on the double doors, walking through the hole as it went right into the quick fill. There wasn't much I could do but follow him. I didn't know where Clyde was, but I hoped that he was safe. The store looked empty as I followed at a relatively safe distance, and the front counter was vacant. It appeared that Clyde had taken me seriously, and as the creature stumbled into the little shop, I found myself spraying at fires left in its passing. He went by the chips, the candy, the snack cakes, all of them curling a little as the heat kissed them. He was making his slow way towards the drink cooler, and he seemed to be looking for something in particular. As he stood looking in, the floor bowed and sagged beneath his otherworldly warmth. I was worried that he would go right through the floor at this rate. When he reached out, slowly and deliberately, his hand melted its way into the cooler, and the puff of angry, cold air that came out was almost comical. It hissed against the creature's skin as it reached in for something, and when it came out with a bottle of Dr. Pepper, the container was already starting to warp. It tilted it towards its head, spilling the dark liquid all over itself, before reaching for another one. By the third bottle, they had stopped crumpling quite so quickly, and by the seventh, it was clear that it was tossing the liquid into whatever served as its mouth. It ran through the whole row of them before starting on the Diet Dr. Peppers, and as it finished the row too, I noticed its skin was less translucent than before. Some of the heat shimmer had left it, some of the blazing warmth had dissipated. It was cooling down, and as it dropped the mostly intact bottles to the ground, it released a very human sigh of relief. Then it fell to pieces on the floor of the quick fill, its body reduced to scrap. And that was the end of my encounter. I'm still not sure what to make of all this. The creature landed on Earth, tromped through the desert, destroyed my shotgun, wrecked up the quick fill, and then drank until he turned into scrap metal. Dr. Pepper, to be exact, but who's counting? I don't know if my supervisors will accept this or not, but I do have something they can use as proof, besides the crater on the outskirts of town. Every step that he took through the desert left behind a perfect little footprint of pure glass, and the glass has a tread in it. I've saved a few of them, just in case, and Clyde has provided a witness statement as well. Apparently he was hiding in the cooler when the creature came in, and saw it drink all the Dr. Pepper before collapsing. Hopefully, that'll be enough to convince my supervisors I'm not crazy. But I hope to never have another night like that one again. Something else comes to mind too, and it makes me hesitant to go to the fridge for my favorite midnight drink of choice. If my fire extinguisher did little more than kick up steam, what's in Dr. Pepper that quenched his heat so well? You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Saikat, Lee Kendall, Janet, and Chris Kinsella for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. And, of course, thanks to Xaronan, Winter, Tyler Parker, Stephanie Carrington, Sarah ASMR, Hi Stacy, Emily Coltsfoot, and Cinnamon Fox, and Bella Lee for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. As I said, if you'd like to have your name read out at the end of every episode that I make, and maybe get a little more, come on down to Patreon and sign up, or become a member on YouTube. Ghostly Reader tier contributors get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down and give it a look. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.